Welcome back to Metropole Television. This is your economic review this morning. Now, meanwhile, the value of unclaimed financial assets held by the government rose to 25.4% to 13.3 billion shillings as the close of June 2019, up from 10.6 billion shillings the previous year. According to the Unclaimed Financial Assets Authority, the value of unclaimed shares it held as at 30th June 2019 stood at 22.9 billion shillings, up from 22.39 billion shillings. Now, the value of unclaimed unit trusts also rose slightly to 18.4 million shillings. Now, the revelation comes weeks after the Unclaimed Financial Assets Authority announced that it had begun the process of moving over 800 million units of unclaimed shares that remained uncollected by owners and beneficiaries to the Unclaimed Assets Trust Central Depository account. Now, the authority has further said it is holding 1,489 safe boxes, up from 1,087 boxes in 2018. Now, to help us paint a picture on exactly what these numbers mean this morning, we are joined by George Manga. George, how are you doing, sir?
Fine, Elijah. How are you doing?
I'm very okay. Well, what is the rise in unclaimed assets point to in the economy? Because that's the question.
I think, Elijah, I have a background with the Unclaimed Financial Assets Authority. We worked with them on a number of projects before.
Yes.
And the reason why the Unclaimed Financial Assets Authority was brought into being, that is via Unclaimed Financial Assets Act number 40 of 2011, was because that the government realized there were quite huge amounts of unclaimed assets banking and insurance industry, and you find that these business entities are using these funds to plow back into their profits. That informed the reason why Unclaimed Financial Assets Authority was put into place. Elijah, if you look at our Succession Act of Kenya, that is chapter number 60, it is very elaborate on who can administrate an estate, deceased person, or how some of these are to survivors of a deceased person. But I think in Kenya is about the knowledge on succession. How do you deal with an asset of somebody who was deceased? But even before we go to Succession Act, there are unclaimed financial assets for individuals who are alive but may not be aware that they have unclaimed financial assets with the UFA, Unclaimed Financial Authority of Kenya. So I think to not only trace these assets in the various institutions, but again, once they trace these assets, they have the obligation to now go and trace the owners of these assets and try and push the assets to the rightful owners. I saw the other day that they are pushing some of these assets to the Unclaimed Financial Assets unit trust. I believe that is just to see that these assets, once they go to the Unclaimed Financial Assets unit trust, they are supposed to earn some interest from that trust, so that when I go maybe 2, 3, 4 years down the line, I not only receive what I left unclaimed for a certain time, but I receive it with at least some commission or some interest over and above what I left. The figures are quite huge, Elijah. You can see that they're talking around 13.3 billion worth of shares, yes, and several other unclaimed financial assets category. Remember, we have deposits, demand deposits, that is the deposits that you leave with the banks. We have shares, we have unclaimed salaries and employment benefits. We have things like dividends, we have things like interest that remains unclaimed with several institutions around the country. So my take is that one, it points to a populace or a citizenry that is not well versed or that is not knowledgeable enough to go back and trace their financial assets. But again, it points back to the authority to try and do civic education. I've not seen them doing a lot of adverts or civic education just to try and sensitize the public on how to retrace their unclean financial assets. So I think the challenges with them to try and carry out this civic education and sensitization so that people can be aware that their assets don't go unclaimed for so long. They can always go back and retrace these assets, Elijah.
George, from what you said this morning, I mean, when you're talking about an unclaimed asset, let's even talk about shares. Let's talk about bank deposits. Is it really possible for the commission to come and tell us, well, they didn't come to pick them up? Because it's possible to backdate it and find somebody who can actually come in and take over these assets. What is the complexity that exists here? Because just I'm asking you these questions because now Kenyans in the past years have blamed the authority for being disinterested in pursuing funds legally belonging to them or their families. Then what are some of the technicalities that arise in trying to connect families with unclaimed assets in Kenya?
Elijah, what I can say is, as I pointed out, is lack of sensitization. That is one.
Yes.
The other complexity is dealing with assets of a deceased person or dealing with that estate. Most citizenry in Kenya don't know how to go around the Succession Act and the administration process. So if, for example, my parent has passed on and I wanted to go and claim their assets, then there's certain documentation that I need to have before I can legally be given those assets. So I think there's that disconnect between what the documentation I need to have to be able to claim these assets and what the authority requires. That disconnect. So my challenge is back to the authority to try and sensitize people not only on the unclaimed financial assets, but again on the process of reconciling them with these unclaimed assets. What is the process of, for example, getting deposits that are due, say, my relative? How do I get those assets if my relative passed on and they don't have a will per se? So I think there's that disconnect. And then secondly, I think there's something that happens in Kenya, Elijah, a lot. Yes. That most persons die intestate. That is, they pass on without leaving a will. And when that happens, then the laws of succession now comes in, and we treat the estate of such a person who have died in test to be distributed. Laws that dictates how an intestate property is now eventually distributed among the surviving relatives. So I think there's a lot of sensitization that has to be done, and maybe you might not leave it to the authority alone. I think several other government agencies should come in to prop them in this. I will call it civic education in this aspect, because otherwise you'll find this fund growing, and of course with the current economy, you don't want these funds lying idle, yet they could be pushed to the economy to prop up the economy, Elijah.
Pretty much. So are you saying that this commission, moving it into the depository accounts, would be a good move as they try and iron out the issues that surround the unclaimed assets in the country?
I think that is a good move.
And George, sorry, take you back again on that. Would it say that would you say that's a better way to protect these assets?
I think so. Elijah, I told you that I have a background with this authority. I've worked with them, and I've seen how they work. They have been very aggressive in trying to locate or trying to identify these unclaimed assets from different organizations. As I told you, initially most organizations would plow these finances back to their profit, which is not the case currently. For example, you find, for example, demand deposits are held with the bank. If it's not claimed for a period of 3 years, then the is obligated to transfer those funds to an unclaimed financial assets authority. So I think the authority has done very well in trying to trace these assets. Now the next be to reconcile these unclaimed assets with the rightful owners, and that starts with what I call invest in unit trust, so that if I had 100,000 as demand deposits that are unclaimed, then I don't get the exact 100,000 when eventually I go back claiming this assets maybe 2, 3, 4 years down the line. So I think it's a good step, but the authority still has a lot of work to be done, not only to trace these financial assets, but again to reconcile these financial assets with the rightful owners. There was a proposal that after a certain period of time, then this asset should revert back to the state to be used in budgetary support. Personally, I don't support that, because if I have assets that are not being claimed for say 10 years, that asset is still mine. It doesn't matter how long I've taken to go and claim it. That asset should still come back to me. So I think their thinking should be, how do we invest this asset so that we protect the value of these assets from the ravages of inflation? Because as time goes by, there's what you call the time value of money. So the same 100,000 that I left maybe in 2016 is not the same 100,000 that I should get today. I should get at least the 100,000 plus something.
Pretty much, George. Thank you very much for sharing your sentiments on this morning. So just before I let you go, George, just 1 minute, please, if you may. Well, we do know that almost 54,000 private school students are going to be forced to look for new schools because almost 200 private schools have closed as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic. But if you look at what the CAS Education, Magoha, is saying, it doesn't see that as a big problem, because it's telling teachers, the parents, that yes, you have the leeway to go in and transfer your students to another school, if you may. What is your sentiment on this? Is there a way that the government would have actually stopped some of these schools from closing? All right, George, I don't know whether you can get me.
Yes, I can get you now.
Yes. So the question was, I mean, if 200 private schools so far have already closed in the country because they didn't have enough resources to actually survive being off business for 6 months, and now almost 54,000 private school students are going to be forced to look for new schools once they resume fully. Is there a way that the government would have sort of helped these private schools not to close shop?
It is a catch-22, Elijah. Remember, these are private institutions.
Yes.
The government has no business delving into private institutions. But again, these are unprecedented times, Elijah, and sometimes it calls for unprecedented. I want to look at what the U.S. did with the economy in the last few months. Remember, the Trump government has given, I think, 2 stimulus packages. That is, I think it was $2 trillion and then $3 trillion that went mostly into private institutions just to try and keep them afloat. I thought that would be the scenario in Kenya. In as much as the government, these are private institutions, but I presume that the government would come up with a package that would assist them stay afloat. I think we did this for hotel or for the tourism industry sometimes in May.
Yes.
I would have loved to see the same being done to the private institutions. Remember, 4,000 students might not be able, all of them, to fit in the public primary schools, because as we know it today, the capacity would be far stretched. A class that was containing 40 might be forced to do only 20. So where do you want to take these students when schools? So I think the ministry should relook at this. In as much as these are private entities, they could be given probably grants that are repayable over a period of time, and that could be channeled through, for example, ICDC, so that it is a commercial transaction. It's not a grant per se, but it's a commercial transaction that stipulates how and when it's likely to be paid. But I think if you leave it just like that, then you don't not only transfer this problem to public schools who also don't have capacity, but you are looking at unemployment, because these private schools employ quite a number of people. So where are you taking these employees who are there before? So if I was in government, that this is an area that I would want to see some support. Remember, we had ESP1 that addressed our tax tax breaks, and then we had ESP2 that was there was some stimulus that was injected in the economy. I think we need to have an ESP3 to inject some money to some of these institutions that are struggling. Remember, Elijah, that education was badly hit when this pandemic came into being, and therefore it is a sector that the government needs to look into and just see how best they can support Elijah.
Pretty much, George. Thank you very much for taking your time to speak to us this morning, sir.
Thank you, Elijah.
All right. Good morning.